My name is Christopher Gist Lee, and I am here on behalf of three ancestors who helped found this nation. Christopher Gist, after whom I was named, was the guide of a young George Washington in 1753 on his way to Fort Le Boeuf in northwestern Pennsylvania and saved his life on the way back. Richard Henry Lee, my great-grandfather's great-grandfather in Philadelphia in 1776, didn't just sign the Declaration of Independence, but he offered the motion that was voted on in July that became the Declaration of Independence. Finally, my ancestor Frank Blair, in this very city of Pittsburgh in February of 1856, presided at the meeting that founded a new, radical, left-wing abolitionist party because the existing parties served the economic interests of the wealthy few to the enslavement of many. That party still exists. Can you guess the name? Republican Party? Okay, good. History lesson done. These men risked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to found and preserve a nation that came to be an example of liberty and democracy for the world. I am here today in the memory of them to question the electoral process that this commission is in the process of creating for the next 10 years in Pennsylvania. I'm not here to say choose us over them, but to speak for the benefit of all Pennsylvanians who would be served by a competent legislature that would move us into the future with respect for our communities. I do not believe that creating safe electoral districts is what these ancestors had in mind. In fact, that is the sort of disenfranchising of voters that they would fight against as taxation without representation. I ask some questions here because they are fundamentally important right now to our democratic process, and yet the media has not asked them to my awareness. And I ask that in our conversation today we avoid the use of rhetorical fallacies, that is, the use of illogic, straw men, personal attacks, appeals to anger or emotion to win arguments. If you find me using a rhetorical fallacy, please stop me. And I'll do the same for you. I seek an honest and open dialogue about the advantages and disadvantages of different courses of action available to this commission as it shapes the next 10 years of our democracy in Pennsylvania. My questions of the commission and its well-informed staff, is this the staff? Okay. Is there a map before the public of the proposed state, Senate, and House districts at this time? No? Okay. Is there a map under consideration and, in fact, finished just a couple of days ago that has not yet been made available to the public? Okay, I'm just asking for facts, not opinions.
Basically, you're supposed to testify for the record. We're not witnesses. It's a different process. You give evidence. We don't give evidence.
That's the way it works.
Yeah. And there's a...
Does it work that way?
Are we required to have a preliminary plan ready within 90 days from the time we adopted those the census numbers?
Yes, that's the constitutional requirement.
Right.
And there's a 30 or a 60-day review period?
I believe that.
Public review? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, 30 and 30, really.
My next question that you don't have to answer is, was data about party registration and voting performance used in drawing up the districts in this map? I will assume yes. And my next question, has the location of the residences of incumbents been included for consideration? I will assume yes. And my final question is, what is different between the process of 1991 or 2001 and today in 2011? Before you don't answer that, let me offer you some insight from past practices of the Commission done 20 years ago, before your time. An official of Common Cause described to me the time that one of the people involved in the redistricting in 1991 came to Common Cause and explained the process smugly. It says, we get a map of Pennsylvania. The 4 legislative caucuses divide the state into 5 areas. The Democrats get Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and some suburbs. The Republicans get everything else, and we agree to fight over the few areas left that are competitive. Then there are 5 staff teams created to create safe districts for the legislators. First, we plot the home of every legislator. If there is a potential strong opponent, we plot their home. Then we look at party registration and voting trends of the last 10 years, and then we build a safe district. End of quote. So the last question was, what is the difference between the process of 1991 and 2001 and today? Don't answer it if you don't want to. It's a complicated question. But you can look at this House District 172, 1991, 2001. This is the dictionary definition of gerrymandering. This picture. Next, I'd like to get your thinking, and again, or not, but stop me if I'm wrong. In a district in which one party is dominant, the candidate winning the primary of the dominant party usually goes on to win the general election. I think that's fairly obvious. The demographic of voters in primaries is different from that of voters in general elections. In primaries, more than in general elections, there are more voters who are dedicated party stalwarts and fewer voters who are ordinary citizens. If a legislator is in a safe district, he is less likely than if he were in a competitive district to have to respond to the needs of his residents, and more likely to be able to respond to the interest of his funders, for example, lobbyists from gambling interests or gas drilling companies. The Legislative Reapportionment Commission has the power through redistricting to eliminate independent-minded fellow legislators by redrawing their districts with a majority of voters of the opposite party or by pitting them against another incumbent legislator. Funders and their lobbyists play a major role in setting the legislative agenda in Harrisburg, for example, legalizing gambling and permitting Marcellus shale gas extraction without taxes or fees. Finally, here are some propositions on the impacts of redistricting to create safe districts. Again, stop me if you want to, if I'm wrong. Safe districts with closed primaries, as is the case in Pennsylvania, result in the advancement of more extreme legislators, both from the right and the left, and fewer moderate legislators who govern from the middle or are likely to compromise. The more safe districts there are, the less likely the legislative agenda is to be set by the needs of the citizens of the Commonwealth, and the more likely the agenda is to be set by the moneyed special interests, such as the gambling industry or the gas drilling industry, the insurance industry, or the American Legislative Exchange Conference. Is there an alternative to this grim situation in the spirit of Richard Henry Lee, Christopher Gist, and Frank Blair? So our legislators will respond to the needs of our citizens instead of to their own needs and to the needs of ideology and to the needs of the money interests who invest in them. Yes, this alternative is an independent commission to establish both legislative and congressional districts without regard to party registration, voting patterns, or the residences of incumbents. There might be problems with this solution, but this solution would harm democracy much less than the current system. There was an effort to establish a constitutional amendment for that in 2008, but it died in all places of the legislature. Like Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, our legislators cannot put down the ring because they are mesmerized by its power to keep them in office, despite the cost to responsive government. What would such an independent commission pay attention to instead? In fact, what could this present commission pay attention to if you wanted to, even though despite the state constitution's call for compact contiguous districts, the Commonwealth Supreme Court has already rolled over and said it's okay for you, it's okay with them for the commission to play politics with redistricting. How about giving a voice in Harrisburg to communities of interest, keeping them whole and giving them a voice instead of cutting them in two, such as in my home county of Center County, where the area, including Penn State University and the town of State College, is split in two for House representation, with no representative living anywhere near State College, and is in the southeast corner of the largest congressional district this side of the Mississippi River, a district unified in its interest in rural affairs, except in State College with its interest in the knowledge industry, represented by Penn State University, which is the future. There are even worse examples of cracking up communities of interest, like Monroe County, which has been split into six senatorial districts, with none of the 6 senators living in Monroe County, none of them needing Monroe County votes to be elected. All of this because in 1991, Monroe County, due to its growth, was threatening to become a unified voice in Harrisburg in favor of school tax reform, and that didn't suit. The voice of Monroe County has been silenced so effectively by gerrymandering that not only did they not get what they needed about tax reform, but also Monroe County is the only home county of a gambling casino that by state legislation has had to share its tax revenue with surrounding counties, costing Monroe County $6 million a year. According to former State Representative Kelly Lewis of Monroe County, these actions destroyed school property tax reform, and the funding provision to share fifth-class county proceeds with contiguous counties is corruption personified. Well, I'm not here to celebrate dysfunction, but to call for action. I call for this commission to solicit redistricting maps from outside parties, such as the geography class at Penn State, who in 2007 made such a map without regard to party voting and the residences of incumbents, and with keen regard to communities of interest, so that we will stop silencing the voices of our communities and start having elections where the candidates are not safe, but are compelled to appeal to the voters, not with absurd, divisive rhetorical fallacies, but with concrete proposals for innovative legislation of all kinds to lift Pennsylvania from worst to first in our nation. This is the same innovation from competition called for by Republicans for our free market system. Will Republicans call for it in our electoral system too? I call for the caucus leaders here today also to return to Harrisburg and pass Representative Scott Conklin's bill for a constitutional convention so we can reform the reapportionment system before this toxic gerrymandering happens again and violates our American ideals again 10 years from now. And I call on the media, corporate, consolidated, and cash-strapped as it is, to stop talking about which candidates are winning the horse race and how much money they have raised, and to start asking the candidates what actions they will take if they get into office, and to investigate whether those actions are aligned with the interests and needs of our citizens. As we develop our legislature over the next 10 years, wouldn't you rather lead the top of the best legislature in this nation, and one that has proven itself in competitive elections and is responsible first to the needs of their citizens? Isn't that the legislature you would like to lead? Thank you very much for listening. Now please act to protect instead of subvert our democratic electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next witness